Oh, thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm Shashi Menon. I'm with EcoEngineers, and we are here today to talk about California's flagship low carbon fuels policy, the Low Carbon Fuel Standards, or the LCFS. California implemented this policy about 10 years ago, and after some initial hiccups, it's finally become a fairly stable policy and a very critical part of the overall suite of decarbonization policies that California has in place. So we've been studying this policy for many years, and we are going to measure if the program has been successful by modeling how much low carbon fuels and low carbon fuel credits will be generated by the program, and looking forward to the year 2023. And what we have found out is that the LCFS is actually doing a very good job. And provided things remain stable, California is well on its way to decarbonize its transportation sector. So why is this important? This is very important, especially right now, because most countries in the world are contemplating a post-COVID economic recovery. And as we all know, any economic recovery is always accompanied with an increase in fuel consumption, more movement of freight, more movement of people. And so as we plan our economic recovery, post-COVID economic recoveries, it's critical that we put in place policies that will mitigate the emissions from the transportation sector. And this is exactly what California's LCFS does. It'll be immensely beneficial to anybody contemplating a post-COVID policy scenario to study the LCFS and the lessons learned from it. I'm joined today by Dr. Roxby Hartley and Sarah Caswell. So Roxby and Sarah, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Yes, please. Thanks, Shashi. I'm Dr. Roxby Hartley, a senior consultant and scientist at EcoEngineers. I'm the principal modeler on this analysis we performed on the LCFS, and I'm an industry expert on the diesel substitute market and carbon capture and sequestration. I also live in California, and my children are growing up here. I am personally invested in the success of the LCFS.
And I'm Sarah Caswell, also a senior consultant and policy expert at EcoEngineers. I'm a lawyer by training, and I've focused my career to help to develop and advocate for low carbon fuels policies at the federal and state levels here in the US. I was part of the advisory group that provided input to the California Air Resources Board prior to its initial implementation of the state's LCFS, and I've been closely monitoring the evolution of the policy over the past 10 years. With President-elect Biden's commitment to taking action on climate change and to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord, we can expect the US to play an increasingly significant role in the global effort to mitigate climate change. The LCFS is a model for a federal policy in the US, and we're very excited to see what the new administration does in its first 100 days. First, by way of introduction, let's play a short video about EcoEngineers.
Carbon is the biggest disruptor of the 21st century, and the world as we know it is changing. EcoEngineers can guide you to make the best decisions as you navigate toward your clean energy goals. Our diverse team of carbon analysts, engineers, scientists, auditors, and regulatory specialists are trusted advisors of the clean energy fuel sectors worldwide. Clean energy regulations are a maze. We simplify them with an unbiased approach and fully manage your compliance. Modeling your carbon reduction is complicated. We quantify your emissions with a rigor based in science. Together, we can create markets that will protect and grow your investment. We create sustainable solutions for a better tomorrow. We are EcoEngineers.
That's EcoEngineers in a nutshell. One of the great things about EcoEngineers is that over our 11-year history, we've helped hundreds of companies in their decarbonization efforts, and we've seen all kinds of project types and fuel types. And our experience has really been distilled into some best practices. And the biggest lesson that we really want to convey to you is that companies who are serious about decarbonization should really do 6 things. You should learn the regulations and the marketplace rules. You should engage with regulators to get the most accurate interpretation of the regulations. You should measure your carbon using science-based technologies. And then, of course, then there's you have to build assets and monetize the carbon. And finally, you have to manage your compliance very rigorously and get third-party validation of any carbon credit claims you're making. What we have done at EcoEngineers is very, very successfully develop services to address all these 6 areas. We are very good at doing these 6 things, and the application of these 6 things is helping decarbonization of the economy.
We're really doubly lucky at EcoEngineers because not only do we work in the low carbon economy, but we actually get to see at a granular level the projects which are actually going forward. We've touched base with a significant percentage of new projects in the US, and it could be anything from an established biodiesel plant looking for auditors or a brand new company looking to bring a new fuel to the marketplace.
Because we're so in touch with what's happening on the ground and into the details of audits and measurement, we also have a comprehensive view of all of the changes taking place. And perhaps more importantly, we can see a little further into the future than most. And we understand what is driving our economy into this phase of decarbonization.
So what is the LCFS? It came out of law that was signed into California. AB 32 was signed into law by Governor Schwarzenegger back in 2006. And the program effectively started in 2011. So we're almost 10 years in. It's designed to reduce the carbon intensity of transportation fuels in California by 20% below 1990 levels by 2030. Transportation fuels accounts for almost 50% of GHG emissions in California, greenhouse gas emissions. And because California is the 5th biggest economy, that's actually a significant chunk of global emissions. And right now, the price of carbon is around $200 a metric ton, which we shall see is sufficient to propel the production of a lot of low carbon fuel substitutes. We understand that California is at the forefront of this change. We had visionary leaders. I say this as a non-native, as you probably can tell. And California is under severe threat of droughts and wildfires. It is hard to describe unless one has sat inside in California at the height of summer in a dim, orange, smoky twilight. It brings home the importance of decarbonizing the economy, literally.
And the LCFS has had its challenges. It's had claims such as that it would increase the cost of fuels and would be detrimental to the economy. It's had to survive several litigations, including one brought under another part of the California EPA, CEQA. But it survived all of those challenges.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. That's a good point. The road has not been easy for California, but we're very happy to say that they're moving forward. And one challenge, particularly, if if I recall early on, was that people kept saying that there will not be sufficient credits generated, and that this whole program will be exorbitantly expensive for the regulated parties. And I think we're finding out that that's just not true.
So we're going to talk a bit about the carbon intensity. It's a critical concept in the program. And it is a measure of how much carbon dioxide a fuel emits to drive your car forward. And it's critical as it is as it's an absolute measure that shows how well a fuel behaves, and a lower value is better. It's usually shortened to CI for carbon intensity, and it's accurately quantified by life cycle analysis, which is how you go through every stage of its production and you work out how much carbon is going to be emitted.
So what you're seeing in this graph is the annual CI limits placed by the California's LCFS policy, and it's a declining limit. And what we learned from this, what you want to know from this, is that a fuel that has a carbon intensity below that curve will generate credits, and a fuel with carbon intensity above the curve will generate deficits. And the goal of the policy is to ultimately create sufficient credits to offset all the deficits that are being generated. And with the price of the credits set at $200 a metric ton right now, there's a lot of incentive to create fuels that have a lower and lower carbon intensity. So it's very important that any LCFS that is formulated, keep in mind that the compliance curve should be balanced against actual supply that is being projected.
Right, and the interesting thing about carbon credits is that they can be banked, and this is a graph of the size of the cumulative bank of carbon credits and credit prices. And you can see at the start of the program, lots of credits were banked. Until about 2017, the credit bank grew. And then demand started to outstrip supply. Obligated parties needed to draw down the credit bank, and the credit prices started to go up. And right now they're trading close to its capped price of $200 a ton of 2016 prices.
What makes this LCFS successful is the consistent implementation of the well-crafted policy, which provides the market stability to assuage risk and therefore encourage investment in low carbon fuels. There are several elements of the LCFS regulations key to this success, including fuel neutrality, the emphasis on science-based LCA analysis, the book and claim accounting system, mandatory verification, and its overall integration with a suite of policy tools unique to California's needs. It also still has some room for improvement. For instance, it still does not allow the farming sector to get credits for improvements in farming practices that affect biofuel production.
No, thanks, Sarah. This is a really important point. From a qualitative perspective, the devil indeed is in the detail. And the way you craft policy and the way you implement policy, you must be very hands-on. And there's a lot of detail in in how the policy is constructed and implemented that makes for its success. But today, I mean, yeah, we could spend a whole day just talking about all this. But today we're going to focus on that last point there, which is that the California LCFS has led to the successful launch of three very important fuel types: renewable diesel, renewable natural gas, and electricity. And we will see how these fuel types are really shaking up the transportation fuel marketplace in California and possibly globally, because once these plants are built, they'll continue to produce low carbon fuels.
Yes, that's right, Shashi. And we're focusing down on those three fuels you mentioned: renewable diesel, renewable natural gas, and electricity. And this is showing the contribution to the carbon market of each fuel type. And you can see the electricity and biomethane, which is renewable natural gas, and renewable diesel have started to dominate the credit marketplace. They're interesting because all three of those fuels can use existing infrastructure to get into the marketplace. So what is renewable diesel? Renewable diesel is it's very similar to biodiesel. It's made from biogenic fats, oils, and greases, and it can also be co-processed with petroleum fuels, petroleum oils, or it can be made in a standalone unit. It meets ASTM D975, and that's a really important point because it's completely interchangeable with petroleum diesel. And we see there's been an estimated capacity announcements of around 2.6 billion gallons of US production by 2023. I say US production, but this also includes Neste Singapore, and that fuel typically comes to the US.
Wow, 2.6 billion. That does seem like a lot of fuel, and it is a lot of fuel when you compare it to California's diesel consumption. But if you compare that to global diesel consumption, it's really not a lot. I mean, I think Canada alone consumes another 10 billion gallons, and the EU is another huge diesel market. But this 2.6 billion could have a significant impact in California. And why this is important is the price of $200 a metric ton in California is going to attract a lot of this fuel to California first. And so this is really like where it's really difficult to predict accurately how much of this 2.6 billion will actually land in California. Credit prices, the willingness of refineries in California to switch over from fossil diesel to renewable diesel, competing marketplaces such as Canada and EU, feedstock prices. There's a lot of variables that go into this, but despite all that, I think we can set some boundaries on what is a reasonable supply of fuel and what can reasonably be expected into California in 2023.
Thanks, Shashi. And let's move on to the next fuel, which is renewable natural gas. And that's natural gas made from landfills and water treatment, and very importantly from dairies as well. The natural gas is dairy digesters in particular capture methane that would go to the atmosphere. Methane has got a very high global warming potential compared to CO2. So these fuels typically have a negative CI, and it can be used in the HDV sector. And it's been a real success story of how many projects we're seeing coming forward. Right now, there's only 11 pathways for low CI dairy digester RNG coming to California. And we anticipate that going up by an order of magnitude to over 100, maybe 150 projects coming online over the next few years. And another great success story of the LCFS is that most of the compressed natural gas going into the transportation sector now is renewable natural gas.
Thanks, Roxby. I think Sarah mentioned this earlier about the book and claim accounting system for environmental attributes. That is critical to the development of the renewable natural gas marketplace in the US. And it's been a tremendous benefit to project developers. And we're actually seeing methane emissions falling dramatically as a result of these projects. These dairy manure lagoons, swine manure lagoons, they're actually taking steps to capture the methane and reuse it because of California's program. The one thing to note about the RNG sector, though, is that the growth of the RNG sector is limited by actual CNG fueling infrastructure in place, or the CNG fueling infrastructure that will be in place in 2023. And the growth of that is a limiting factor. So what we have done is taken that into consideration as we model the potential availability of RNG in 2023. And so there's not a huge dramatic growth in volume as we are seeing in renewable diesel. But however, what we're seeing is that because of the high value of carbon, people are very aggressively capturing methane emissions and reusing that methane molecule. And the carbon intensity of the RNG coming into California is falling lower and lower and lower to -200 and -300 levels. And that's an excellent story to repeat in other parts.
And the last of these fuels is electricity from electric vehicles. And this is different from the first two fuels as it goes into the light duty sector. It replaces the fuel for passenger cars. But some of it is also going into the heavy duty sector, which is for forklifts and loaders, but not typically into the transportation sector as a whole. It does have very low CI because electric motors are very efficient compared to gasoline engines. They're very good at getting the energy into the wheels. And right now, there's a surprisingly diverse list of pathway holders. I mean, it's very much because of the benefits of the book and claim accounting system. You can generate the electricity across the nation and then claim the credits in California. And it's a great success story. It's being pushed very hard by California.
Right, Roxby. You know, it's really surprising about how diverse the companies are who are participating in this market in California. It's almost as if they were all waiting for a program like the LCFS to convert their fleets to electricity. We have automakers, municipalities, public transit, grocery stores, food manufacturers, and a ton of different types of entities buying electric vehicles and taking advantage of the LCFS by generating credits.
Right, so we've talked about the three different fuels we're seeing coming forward and expanding volume of carbon credits come to California, and how will that affect the credit bank? So we developed three scenarios: one, high demand with and then we had a low demand, and we have a middle scenario. And let's look at the high renewable diesel and electricity scenario here. This is where we have 2.1 billion gallons of renewable diesel supply, 125 new animal manure pathways for renewable natural gas, and over 6 million metric tons of carbon credits generated from electric vehicles. And in this case, the credit bank grows to around 8 million metric tons by 2023. Then the low demand scenario, the low renewable diesel and electricity supply scenario, there's only 0.9 billion gallons of RD supply. 125, we stuck with 125 new animal manure pathways for renewable natural gas, because that's what we see is coming to the marketplace. But we cut down the amount of electricity, the metric tons of carbon generated by electricity, to 3 million. And in this case, by 2023, the credit bank is hovering around being positive. So that's a great measure of success. Even in the lowest scenario, we see the credit bank going positive. And let's go to the medium scenario. So this is what we think is the most likely. And we stuck with 125 new animal manure pathways. 5.15 million metric tons is where we see EVs going on trend. And we restricted the supply of RD to 1 billion gallons, not because there's going to be, it's going to be demand restricted, because that's what is required to make the credit bank whole. And in this case, the credit bank goes to around 2 million metric tons by 2023.
The key takeaway from all of this is that California's LCFS, combined with CARB's consistent implementation of it, is a model policy for states and regions considering a post-COVID recovery plan and policies to drive decarbonization at the same time. We cannot go into the full details in just 20 minutes here, but we do have a detailed report that you can read on how the LCFS works and why it is so successful.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Roxby. And definitely a big thank you to Reuters for hosting a fabulous conference and for putting this platform out in these times. We'll be happy to talk to you at great lengths about LCFS. Unfortunately, we only have about like 10-20 minutes today, but feel free to reach out to any of us and we'll be happy to discuss this in more detail with you and share a copy of our report. Thank you.